Alrighty, so this week we are going to be talking about instantiating or spawning objects. Now, those of you who are somewhat familiar with scripting may recognize this term because what we're going to be doing is instantiating prefabs. And prefabs you can think of as classes of objects. Again, for those of you who program, I'm sure you've instantiated classes before. And when we say instantiate, that means making an instance of an object, right? And you can think of it in simple terms as, in Unity, as we're spawning an object in the scene, or a prefab in the scene as an object. Now, if I went into my prefabs here, right, I have these rooms, and I can grab them and drag them out like this, right? Now, instantiating, what we can do is actually tell Unity to do that itself. And what you do is you call on the instantiate function, and you're like, okay, first off, what am I instantiating, or what am I spawning? Room 2. Then where am I spawning? That's kind of the process that you would have of dragging it out here, right? So, and then the rotation that it's spawning in. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So, I'm going to be typing up this script as we go, because I've been told that that is helpful. So I'm going to create a folder, and we'll call this Module 7. So we're going to create a new C# script, and we're going to call this spawn objects, and open this up. So first off, we need to get our object to spawn. So we're going to create a public variable to drag in a prefab that we want to be spawning in. There are other ways to do this, but this is how we're going to do it right now and what you guys are used to. So we're going to create a public game object. So this variable is going to hold a game object, and we're just going to call this we're going to call this ball because I'm going to make it a ball. And now here's how the instantiate function goes. This is a Unity function. You don't have to worry about the details. You have to worry about what this function accepts and what you need to put into it. So, oops, there we go. We're going to type instantiate and then put parentheses because it's a function. Now, the instantiate function accepts 3 arguments. The first thing is the object that you're going to be spawning in. The object we're spawning in is this game object here, ball. So we're going to type ball, because that's a variable referencing that. Then we're going to put a comma. The next thing is where are we spawning it, right? And right now, we're just going to spawn it at the position that this... So this script is going to be on a game object, which is going to be at some position in space. We're going to spawn it on this game object that the script is on at that position. So we're going to say just transform dot position. Okay, now the last thing this accepts is how do you want it to be rotated. Now this is where we get into dealing with quaternions, and we're just simply not going to deal with them in Game Design 1. We'll talk about them in Game Design 2. So what you're going to say here, and I'm going to explain what this means, is you're going to go, and we're going to see if I spell quaternion right the first time. Quaternion dot identity. Oopsies. I spelled quaternion right, and then I didn't spell identity. Identity. So what this is doing, basically, is it's just saying inherit the rotation of the prefab that we're spawning in. So it'll just spawn it in at whatever direction the prefab is rotated. With a sphere, you won't really be able to tell because it's a sphere, but, you know. Okay, so what is this going to do? This is going to instantiate this game object that we drag in here in our scene at the position of the game object this script is on at the rotation of whatever this ball prefab is rotated. So we shouldn't get any errors here, which we don't. Let's actually go ahead and create a ball prefab. So we're going to go ahead and create a 3D object, call it sphere. We're just going to call this ball. Now we need to zero this out before we make it a prefab, or else it's not going to be in the correct world location when we spawn it in. So that's at 0, 0, 0. Then we're going to go into prefabs and drag our ball in. So we can go ahead and delete this from our scene. Now, welcome. No, you're good. We're talking about instantiating or spawning objects today. So, now that we have our ball in our scene, let's actually create an empty game object for what the script is going to go on. So we're just going to call this object spawner. We're going to go ahead and zero this out right now. Let's have it spawn the ball like up here. Now we're going to go ahead, go into our scripts, and we're going to grab our spawn object script. So now we need to actually drag what we're spawning into here. Now the ball is not an object in our scene. It is a prefab. So we're going to go into our prefabs. We can see we have our ball here. So we're going to go ahead and drag this in. Now, when I click play, because this script is on the object spawner, which is located here, and in our script, where we put where it's spawning, we just said transform position, it's going to take the transform position of the object the script is on. So it's going to spawn it right here. So let's click play. And now we have this ball that's been instantiated here. Now, to make this a little more fun, let's actually go into our prefab here and put a rigid body in here, which is just a way to simulate physics. I'm just putting a rigid body and then I'm not going to do anything with it, just so it can fall, because I think it'd be a little fun. So now, we're going to click play, and it's going to spawn in a ball that's going to fall. So there we go. We have our ball. Beautiful. Now that's very simple. Now, can anyone tell me what's going to happen if we put this in the update function?
It's going to happen every frame.
Yes. It's going to try to spawn in a ball every frame. Now, let's see. Let's see what happens. We'll see if Unity crashes. This is where you have to be careful about where you put things, because this is going to be, yep. Actually, it's handling it quite well. And now we've created this beautiful, I don't know, firework of balls. So, yeah. And the reason it restarted the scene there is because, remember, we have our time limit from last time. So, this is kind of horrifying. Now, let's say for some reason you actually do want to be spawning in this many objects in your game, right? What's going to happen? And let me actually, hold on. Where is our, I want to find my time limit script. Wherever that is. I'm trying to remember where we put that. We put it somewhere. Where did we put it is the question. MISC maybe? Ah, here we go. Game manager. Time limit. Let's put this really high, like 800. So here's the problem, right? Let's say we actually want to be spawning in this many objects. For whatever reason. I don't know. Now, here's the problem. None of these objects are getting destroyed, right? They're going to keep going into the void for all eternity. And as this runs, the frame rate is going to get worse and worse, well, because none of these objects are going away. Unity is still having to deal with them, even if you can't see them. Like, look at all those. That's crazy. I'm surprised the computer's okay right now. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to set a time limit for them to be destroyed. Now, this is really easy. This isn't like what we did here. This is really simple, actually. And we're going to use the destroy function that we went over. So what we're actually going to do, I think the easiest way, well, I'll show you in here. So this is not the right script. Where am I? Here we go. Spawn objects. So what we're going to go ahead and do, and this is not going to work, first off, and I'm going to ask if you guys can tell me why, and if you don't know, that's okay. But people who have programmed before may understand it, but if not, that's fine too. So we want to destroy the object after a certain amount of time after we spawn it in. Luckily, the destroy function just lets us do this. So we're going to destroy the ball after, I don't know, let's say 5 seconds. This is going to give us an error. Does anyone know why this is going to give us an error?
Because there's a lot of balls.
No. So here's the thing.
Because it stops it after 5 spawns?
No. So here's the thing. We're saying here, right, this is our prefab ball, correct? We're saying we're spawning in this prefab at this position, at this rotation. And then what we're saying here actually is not to destroy what we've spawned in, but to destroy the prefab, which is not what we want to do, because, and luckily Unity warns you about that and won't let you delete the prefab, thank God. But this is an issue that a lot of beginners make, where they spawn in an object, and instead of deleting the instance of that object that they've spawned in, they try to delete the actual prefab here. Because when we say destroy ball, we're referencing this prefab that we dragged in. So we need to destroy the instance. So how do we do that? Well, the answer is we need to basically store the instance in a game object, right? So what we're going to do is, and actually let's do this in the start function first just to show you, because it'll be less horrifying to look at. So what we're actually going to do is, instead of creating a public variable up here, we're going to create a variable down here. We're going to say game object, and then we're going to name this temp for temporary. And it's going to be equal to what we instantiate in. So this right here, this temp, is a game object that is equal to the instance of ball, so whatever we spawn in, if that makes sense. So then what we're actually destroying is the instance of that game object. So then we're destroying temp after 5 seconds. So when I do this, and let's actually make this 2 seconds because I don't feel like waiting 5 seconds because I'm impatient. So let's see what happens here. We have our ball, and then after 2 seconds, it goes away. Now, let's just see what happens if we were to try to actually run this destroying the prefab, right? Again, luckily it won't just delete it. That would be very bad. It actually throws you an error. Yeah, destroying assets is not permitted to avoid data loss. So it won't let you destroy a prefab. Thank God, because there were so many times that I made this mistake when I was first starting out using Unity, and it's something that's an easy mistake to make. So, one thing that's really important to remember is if you want to destroy something you've spawned in, you can't destroy the prefab. You have to destroy the instant of that object. So, you can create a reference here to that. One thing I'm kind of tempted to try, actually, that just came to my mind, this is something we're going to learn together. I'm just very curious if we can do this. If I can go like this, and like this, and then like this. I don't know if this is going to work. If it does, I'll does this actually work? That'd actually be awesome. That makes that even easier. I've never done it that way before, but I mean, if it works, then cool. Let's see. It does work. Okay, cool. So another way to also do this is, instead of creating the temporary game object up here and then destroying it down below, which is completely fine, by the way. That's a completely acceptable method. You can actually, because keep in mind, the destroy function, let me just explain it this way. The destroy function takes in 2 arguments, right? The game object that you're destroying, and then the time it's going to take to destroy it, right? So what we're actually saying here in this first parameter we're putting in, this whole thing here is the game object that we want to destroy, which is also the object that we're instantiating. So we've actually like nested these functions in a way. So we're destroying the instantiation of ball, and so we can shove it right in there, and then put the delay that we want to destroy in. Just make sure you put a comma there, and that the parentheses match up, right? These parentheses are for the destroy function, these are for the instantiate. If this is too hard to look at for you and you prefer the other way, that's completely fine. You can do it that way too. Now, one thing, let's actually see what happens if we put this in the update function. Come on. Go ahead and get rid of it in the start. And that works too. You can put it in the update function as well, because Unity will keep track, which is nice. Unity keeps track of all your instances, and that, okay, we're destroying that instance, and then sets that time limit, which is quite nice. So you can see here, actually, this creates kind of a cool visual of when things are getting destroyed, because you can actually see when the balls stop falling, because they're being destroyed. And by the way, if you're wondering why they're exploding out in all well, not all directions, but exploding out, it's because we have these spheres with rigid bodies and colliders on them, and we're telling them 60 times a second to spawn in the same spot. So what happens is then you have 2 physics objects trying to exist in the same spot at once, and so they push each other away. And so then we get this crazy effect where we have all these balls spawning in here. So this is quite fun to mess with, but you do need to be careful with it. And you can even see some of the balls are actually getting bounced off of the other ones and going up in the air. So It's pretty fun. So that right there, these two functions, which I'm going to separate these again actually. Hold on, let me just Control Z, makes it easier. These two functions here, destroy and instantiate, work together to do a lot of things. Yes?
Is there a way to end it and when it's in the to end the entire animation when it's in the update function?
So do you mean like to stop instantiating?
Yeah, so like when it's spraying the balls out, is there a way to put a timer on it?
Yeah, so like if you wanted it to only spawn things for a certain amount of time, basically. Yeah, absolutely. So we could actually do, and since we have time today to talk about this, we can go over this. And actually this is important too, because that we go over some different things, because your assignment, because it's weird how it lined up with spring break, so I'm actually giving you guys 2 weeks to do it. And so I'm giving you a little bit of creative freedom, and I want you guys to try to step out of your comfort zone a bit with scripting in Unity. And if you need help, again, always just email me. I want you guys to essentially create a way to, you're going to spawn in an object in your scene, right? And then that object will hurt the player, as in reset the player in some way. So that could be as simple as you walk into a trigger area and a boulder spawns in this hole above the ceiling and can fall on the player, right? So you guys are going to be creating a way that can happen. So let's go over actually. Let's say we wanted to instantiate all these balls for a certain amount of time, right? Maybe your player triggers something and it triggers this, like maybe it's bullets being shot at you and it happens for a certain amount of time. So we can do that like how we use the time limit actually in our time limit script, if you remember when we did that. So if we go into our game manager here, let's actually open this up. So we're going to do something very similar to what we did here. And this is where the things I'm teaching you are going to start to overlap. And the idea of Game Design 1 is you get all these different functions and knowledge of how to do things in Unity, and you combine them to be able to create games. Because by the end of this class, you should have enough knowledge to at least create basic games. And of course, you'll always have to research stuff, and you're always learning new stuff. But these are the fundamentals of being able to build something and make it work. So time and time limits are very important and work really well with spawning objects and destroying them. So let's actually grab these two here. We're going to grab our float time and our time limit. We're actually going to call this spawn limit. And then we're going to create actually, let's not do that yet. I'm thinking of something else. So what we're going to do in the update is we need time to increase every second. So we're going to say time plus equals 1 times time dot delta time, which is increasing it by 1 every second. And then we're going to say, in this, we're going to create an if statement. And we're actually going to say if time is less than or equal to our spawn limit, then we're going to spawn the objects in, right? If it's not, then we're not going to spawn the objects in. So after we get past that limit, it's not going to spawn them in anymore, whatever we set the spawn limit to. So let's go back into our scene here. Go into our object spawner. So let's set our spawn limit to 5 seconds. So for 5 seconds, basically, or actually we'll do 6 seconds. I don't know. I feel like it's 6. So for 6 seconds, it's going to spawn in all these balls, and then once time reaches 6, it's going to stop. So you can see our time is ticking. It's still spawning in. And then after 6 seconds, it just stops. So what if you wanted to trigger this, right? Like the player walks into a trigger. Well, for that, we would need a Boolean. So remember, a Boolean is a true or false statement. So we're going to create a Boolean, and we're going to call this can spawn, right? And then what we want to do is we don't want time to tick if we can't spawn anything in, right? We don't want any of this to happen if this isn't enabled. So if can spawn, as in if can spawn equals true, that's what that means. And we could say equals true, but there's no need to do that because it automatically does it if you just put it in. So if that equals true, we're going to grab all of this, which by the way, if you highlight over what you want, hold Alt, and then press the arrows on your keyboard, it'll move that code that you've selected up and down. Just a nice thing to know. Let's actually tab that in. Wait. Ugh, fine. Just do it that way. Whatever. Okay. As long as it's separate, and I can see that clearly. Hold on. I meant to tab it. Yeah, tabbing was what I wanted to do. It's fine. So, this right now is going to do nothing, and we want this to equal false by default, because we don't have a way of setting this Boolean to true, right? We need to set this to true. And when do we want to set it to true? Well, it's up to you. You could set this to true when the player, you could do an input, right? Like if the player presses the key E, for whatever reason, it spawns all these in. Or, again, if you were making a trap, maybe, it would be like a trigger, so like an on-trigger enter. And we can use the on-trigger enters exactly how we use them for the key. So maybe we'd create an empty game object and call this trap, right? And let's zero this out for now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put a box collider on this. And again, this is another thing we've learned that we can use to combine it with a time limit and spawning things in to make a trap setup, right? So we're going to bring this game object up here, this trap. And we have this collider here. Now, let's go ahead and make the zone, just make sure the player will hit this. Let's make it something like this, right? And then we're going to set it to isTrigger. So when the player walks through here, we're going to do something. Now, we need to tag this so we can reference it in our script, right? And I'm going to show you. So we're going to create, like we did before, a void on trigger enter 2D collider other. And now, in here, we need to check what collider we're entering, right? So we're going to say if other.gameObject, so the game object that we've entered, if its tag, we're going to compare the tag, equals, well, we don't have a tag made for it yet, so let's make a tag. It's going to give us an error right now, but that's okay. So let's create a tag, like we've done before, and we're going to call this trap1. And then we're going to tag it trap1. Let's actually name this trap1, because maybe we have multiple traps in our scene. So, when we enter the object tagged trap1, then all we simply need to do is set our canSpawn variable to true. So canSpawn equals true. And now this should work. So now I should be able to walk through this, and then it will spawn the balls. Where's our object spawner? Oh, it actually happens to be like right where that is. Cool. So let's just see what happens here. I have the player's view here. And nothing happens because I have an error. Hold on. Oh, did I type? Oh, my bad. Don't type the 2D. I've been working on a 2D game, so that's habit for me. In a 3D, you do not use on-trigger enter 2D. You just use on-trigger enter.
Unity does 2D games?
Yes, absolutely. There's a whole 2D engine. Yeah. In fact, it was actually made originally, I believe, for 2D games, but it also does 3D. But learning in 3D, if you can make games in 3D, you can make them in 2D, generally. The only thing that's harder about 2D that you have to worry about is layering, kind of like what sprites are on top of each other. But that's really not too hard. And Unity has built-in stuff for that. Anyway, this should work now. Just kidding, it does not work. Why does it not work? Probably because I'm an idiot, that's why. Well, so the object spawner, let's actually think about this. The object spawner is what this script is on, right? We're checking if this on-trigger enter, we're checking if the object spawner enters it. This isn't actually on the player. Now, this is where we get to the point, actually, where in this case, it might actually be better then to have this attached to the player, right? So, but the problem with that is if we have it attached to the player, it's going to spawn them right on the player, right? So this is when we're actually going to go in here. And this is actually why I kind of like doing this with you guys, like coding this out, because then you can see in real time, like, oh, shoot, this doesn't work because of this, because that's how it is in game design. So we want to be able to put the script on the player so this works here. So let's go ahead and actually change the location that we're spawning in, because what we've been saying this whole time is just spawn in the object at the position of the object the script is on. And if this object is on the player, it's going to spawn things right on the player. We don't want that, right? We want our balls to spawn in maybe from like above the player in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a public transform as in a location in space, and we're going to call this spawn location. And we're going to set where it spawns equal to the spawn location dot position. And we just have to say dot position. We don't have to say transform dot position in this case because it's a transform. If we made this a game object, which would work too, that's fine, but then we have to say transform dot position. Just an FYI, which is why it's a bit easier to make a transform in this case. So we've created a public transform that we can drag in. So we are going to create another empty game object, and we're going to call this trap spawn. We're going to go ahead and zero this out, and I'm going to give this a red like dot, just to make it a little easier to see. So let's have things spawn like up here. So then if we go to our object spawner, actually, we can just remove this spawn object script from the object spawner and delete this game object because it's going on the player, right? So let's go on to our player rigid, and we're just going to actually add a component. We're going to add our spawn object script that we made onto here. You can actually just, because it's a component, scripts are our own components we've made, so we're adding that onto there. Now, we need to drag our stuff in. So first off, we have our ball that we're spawning in, which is our prefab. I hate how tiny or oversized everything is on the screen. Okay, so we have our prefab ball that we're dragging in. We have our spawn location, so our trap spawn, and then we have our spawn limit, so how long it's going to be spawning for, which we're going to set to 5 seconds. So now let's just go over what we're doing again. We're getting a reference to our ball prefab. We're getting a reference to a location in space, which is going to be where we spawn the instant of this prefab. We have our time here, which ticks up, and our time limit here for how long it's going to be spawning in, and we have this boolean for if it can spawn or not. If it can spawn, which is set true when we enter the game object tagged trap1, then time is going to start increasing. Once time is greater than the spawn limit, it won't be able to spawn in these objects anymore. And we're spawning the object at the spawn location here. So this should actually just work, I think. So let's grab our. I like how the amount of times I say that and then it just doesn't work. We're gonna find out. It should though. So we walk into here. Yep, and there it is. Ah. And so maybe what you would just have, let's say you had a boulder falling from the ceiling, right? Maybe instead of a time limit, then you would just do this once, right? Maybe we'd get rid of our, we'll just comment this out. Because things that are commented out, it doesn't actually run them. Kind of like the note it has here. So we're going to comment that out. We're going to comment out this. And then after this happens, we're going to set can spawn to false again. So that way it doesn't keep doing it. So can spawn equals false. But then it will do it again if we entered that collider again. And so now it should just drop one ball on us. Yep. Ah. So, and then it disappears. So you could do something like that very easily, right? And let's go ahead. I'll keep those commented out. Or actually, I think I'll get rid of them for now, actually, for the time being. Now, here's the thing, right? If you only want this to happen once in your scene, right? If you only want the ball trap to happen once, then you're going to have a problem because if you enter this again, it's setting it to false right afterwards, but this can be set to true again if you enter it, right? So I can keep entering this over and over again if I want to. So I can run into here, it spawns the ball, and then I can enter it again and it spawns the ball, and and then again, as long as I want to, because we don't have any logic that's saying, hey, you can't spawn anymore. Now, how do we want to do this? So, right now, we're using a weird system. This doesn't make sense what we're doing, actually. There is literally no need for this variable to be to be using this in the update function. We're going to get rid of this, actually. And by default, actually, we're going to set can spawn to true, and you're going to see why. We're going to grab all of this. We're going to copy it. We're going to put it down here. So what's happening now? Well, when we enter the collider tagged trap1, it's going to spawn in our object, destroy it after 2 seconds, and set can spawn to false, but originally it's true. So we're also going to say here, if the other game object is trap1, and, which you do that in if statement, if I can, there we go. You can put this double and sign here to check if other logic is also true. So we're going to say and can spawn equals true, which again, we don't have to type that out. So if the other game object is tagged trap1 and can spawn equals true, which it is by default, then we can do this. But once we do this, it's setting can spawn to false. So each time, even if we enter it again, it's going to be like, yes, it's trap1, but we can't spawn. This is set to false. This will only run if this is set to true. So when we try this now, it will only be able to do it once. So this is just an example of one way you could spawn an object in your scene. Hello. Don't worry, I'm recording the lecture, so you'll be able to get caught up. So now when we enter this, though, it can't do it anymore. So let's actually talk about how we're going to make the player reset, right? We need to make this object dangerous, right? Our ball dangerous. Does anyone have any suggestions for how we could do this? Yes.
You could put like something like the player reset script on the ball prefab.
Yes, kind of, basically. You can use, yeah, you can use a collider to do that too. So all we would have to do, right, is put a collider on the ball and then just detect, okay, if the player enters the ball, then reset the scene, right? So we can just, on this ball, put a collider. Wait, there's already a sphere collider on it, never mind. And because maybe we want the ball to be able to like hit the ground, here's the problem. We could use an on trigger enter, right? But then we have to set this to trigger. And then this will just phase through the ground because it's a trigger. So we actually want to use an on collision enter. Now you could still use an on trigger enter if you wanted, but if you wanted it to collide with the ground, you would have to put another sphere collider on there. But there's really no point in doing that because we can just use an on collision enter instead of an on trigger enter. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So using basically the exact way we did with this flag here, we're going to basically say, hey, when we hit this object, reset the scene, except this time it's bad. You don't want it to do that in this case because it's no good. So what am I doing? Ball. Yes, this is our ball. I think what we'll want to do is if we go on to our player here, we have this reset player script, like you said. And right now in the update, we're saying if this is for if they fall off the map, right? We remember we did this. So let's actually create an on trigger, on collision enter. So we're going to go void on collision enter, not 2D. And then for this one, I believe you have to say collision, not collider, collision other. Bless you. And then we're doing the same thing. We're checking if other, oops, we're checking if other dot game object dot compare tag is equal to, and then this is going to be, I think it's trap1. Is that what, actually, is that what the ball's called? That's not what the ball's called. We'll just call it evil ball. That's what we're going to call it. This is our evil ball. So let's make sure, first off, we tag the ball. Let's go into the prefab here. And we don't have an evil ball tag. We just made that up. So let's create an evil ball tag. And then we still need to assign it to this. Cool. So this is tagged evil ball. So if we collide with evil ball, then we're going to reset the player. So we can just literally do this again. Bonk. And then that's it. And this is already on the player script, so it shouldn't be a problem. And I believe, yeah, this should be able to collide with it just fine. We just need the ball to hit us. So let's walk. Bonk, and then it resets the scene. We've died. And now, too, if we run quick enough, we can dodge it. Then it goes away. So that's just one example of what you could do. Now, again, because we still have more time, I'm just going to go over some other things. So that way you can look back at this lecture and be like, ooh, I could do that. That's how I do that. Maybe we have like a giant room and there's a Minecraft pressure plate right in the middle. And if you step on it, a bunch of arrows, quote unquote, fly at you. How would we do that? Well, there's actually quite an easy way to do that. And it's by applying force to the rigid bodies. Now, we actually don't even have to do this in code. If we were creating a turret, maybe that was, or actually, no, I don't even think, well, yeah, we would have to in that case. If we were creating a turret or something that was, right, constantly facing towards the player, which I don't think we get into in this, well, actually, we kind of will. But if it was constantly facing the player, we would need to make sure each time it shoots, it adds force to that ball, or the bullet, quote unquote, in the direction it's facing. That requires some math. But in this case, what we can actually do is just set up the prefab to, hey, this is the direction you go in, no matter what. And we can do that by using a constant force. So what I mean by constant force is that is just a component. So you have to have a rigid body on, but we could go over here and grab this constant force here. So we have a lot of options here. Let's actually, I guess we can just let's add some force on the x-axis. So let's put this at like, I don't know, 30. That should do something probably, I hope. So when we spawn this in, where's the x-axis? It is that way. So the ball should kind of fly off to the right when we spawn it in, because it has a constant force applied to it. Yeah, you can see it flies off to the right. So how can we do this with a cannon then, or something? Well, let's say you have your cannon set up. I'm going to make a really shitty looking, hold on. We're going to create the cylinder. This is going to be our cannon. And then maybe actually we'll put our, well, let's zero this out first. And we'll rotate this, would it be on the Y? Okay, well that did, no. Nope, I literally did every single axis except the one I was supposed to. Okay, so we have our cannon here. Let's size this up. It's a beautiful cannon, I swear. And we have it over here. This is our lovely cannon. And it's going to be shooting our ball. So let's go ahead and put our trap spawn, actually. Let's drag this under the cannon, and we're going to zero it first. Let's actually put this at where the muzzle of the cannon is, right? Because that's where we want to spawn it. Now we're going to put it a little bit far away because the ball's a bit bigger. And we don't want it smacking into this. Although, I suppose, actually, we don't need to have a collider on this cannon. The player's not going to be touching it, so it can be in there. Then it won't affect it. So we have our cannon here, and we have our trap spawn. So now, we want this to go on the negative x-axis, right? That's where we want it to have force, because this would be on the x-axis. So what we're actually going to do is just, well, do that, negative 30 on the x-axis. And let's see what that does when we enter this. And I think that's lined up. Yeah, that seems to be lined up with the collider. Let's see what happens here. Oh God, please Unity. I've been a good boy. Don't crash. There we go. Okay. So if we move forward here, that's not enough force, basically, is what we've learned. So let's just, add a 0, because why not, right? It's fun. And let's even, you know what? Let's just have some fun here. We're doing game design. Why would we have a small ball when we can have a bigger ball, right? Exactly. And then a bigger ball, of course, needs a bigger cannon to shoot it. So we're just going to do that real quick. And then make sure the trap spawn is, yep, it moved with it. Good. And let's actually move this bit up. Okay. Let's see if 300 is enough to be terrifying. I actually don't know how big I made that ball. This may be like way too big to even Nope, it's just, I don't even know if you can dodge that, but no, you cannot. So there's a lovely cannon with our ball. Maybe we would want to make that a little bit less horrifying, so it's possible to dodge it. Maybe like half that speed. So that's how you could add it's shooting it. Now if you wanted to, you could make this using the time limit that we used before. You could make it shoot a bunch of them, right? Like how we were instantiating a bunch of them in at once. You could make like a ginormous, like horrifying Gatling gun of these if you wanted to. And don't worry, Brett, when you watch the lecture back, you can see the explosion that we had. Oh, nope, still can't dodge it. So we would want to mess with that for a bit. I'll try changing it to like 70 and see what happens.
You see it coming, though.
You can see it coming, at least. This is true. It's just there's no way to dodge. Come on. I swear that hit me, but it didn't trigger. That's interesting. Anyway, so yeah, that's how you could do something like that. Now, if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to make this actually make sense that it only fires once. What if we had, and again, these are just examples. I would actually recommend you create with ProBuilder or some modeling program an actual, like, something that resembles a cannon, at least to some extent. We're going to call this, let's call this Bullet GFX. Let's put it under the trap spawn for now, just to zero this where I want it to be. We're going to put this here. And actually, no. Why would I do that? Let's drag this in. And this right here, we're going to completely unpack this prefab. We're going to right-click it, go to prefab, and unpack completely. I just want something that's the same size. We're going to get rid of the constant force. We're going to get rid of the rigid body, get rid of the sphere collider. The only thing I want this for is just as like a, it's loaded right now, basically. And why am I doing it that way? Oh God. Please, I beg of thee. Okay, so our cannon is loaded, right? We can see it's loaded. So what we could actually do is very easily just turn this off, right? Once we fire, we could just set this to inactive, and then after it's fired, we can physically see it's fired, right? So this is just something I'm adding in just to show you some things you can do. And again, we can use another thing we've learned, which is hiding or activating or deactivating game objects. Or you could destroy it too if you want. Either way works. I think I'll use the set active, though, just as an example. So we have our ball, and we're going to call this GFX. And let's just put this under cannon here. So where do we want the reference for this? Well, I believe it depends on where we're firing, actually, which the spawn objects is in here. So we're spawning our object in here, right? We're shooting our ball out, or we're spawning our ball in, which has a constant force here. So this is where we want to get rid of it. This is where we want to hide that GFX we've added in. So we're going to create a public game object, and we're going to just call this Bullet GFX. It's more like a cannonball, but whatever. Bullet is easier to type out. Okay. So we have a reference to that game object, and then down here we're just going to say bullet GFX dot set active to false. And then all of a sudden it will disappear. And honestly, I may just hold on. Oh God, it scales the whole thing. Hold on. Just because it doesn't really look like it's holding it, let's just do that. There we go. Beautiful. Now I'll put this back under. So, we have to first go into our player, and in Bullet GFX, right, we're going to go ahead and add in the GFX right there. So this should turn off when it fires, which creates the illusion, right, that this right here that we've already seen is what went forward. Right, you can't even tell from the player's perspective there in the bottom right. It actually looks pretty smooth because it's spawning in at relatively the same location. See? You can't even tell. And that's a lot of what game design is it's the illusion of things happening, right? What it looks like here is that we have this ball, and this ball is shooting out, right? That's what it looks like, and it looks pretty good, actually. You can't tell. But what's actually happening is we have this sphere rendered in that has nothing on it. We're just simply hiding it whenever we launch it, and then we're spawning in a prefab or instantiating in a prefab that has a constant force applied to it. So it's an illusion that it's a cannon. And so these are just a few examples of what you can do, and you can watch these lectures back. Again, you have 2 weeks to do this assignment because of spring break, and so I want you to get creative, right? Again, maybe you have like a cave level or a dungeon, and then you have a trap where, like we did before, like a ball falls down on you. Maybe you have a cannon off to the side. Maybe you have one of those, like, I don't know if you guys ever watched those old, like, GTA, what was it called? Avalanche videos where like all the cars and stuff, like they're trying to run up the hill and like all this stuff is falling down and they have to dodge it. You could do something like that, really whatever you want. And so there's a lot of different things you can do. And the point of this too is to get you a bit more comfortable with scripting and doing research, because maybe there's something you want to do, but you're like, well, to do that I need to know how to do this, but I don't know that yet. So you have to look it up. Because at the end of the day, the point of these classes are to get you started, but to actually progress and go further in game design, you're going to have to take it upon yourself to do research and learn things yourself. And so, again, you can always contact me too if you need help with something. I'd be more than happy to get on a call with you and sit down and we can go over something. That actually kind of does look like a bullet casing a little bit, and we can go over it. So that's what you're going to be doing this week. So if I go into the assignment here, and the lecture will appear here, just says, this week we continue to learn programming in Unity. We will create a script that spawns objects that can harm the player. With this lesson, we will learn more about how components talk to each other and get more practice creating variables and functions. So the requirements for this assignment are a script that somehow instantiates objects in your scene. The objects instantiated can harm or reset the player. And the object instantiates the hold on. It should say how the object instantiates and the way it harms the player matches the theme of your level. I forgot a word there, apparently. How the object. And when I say matches the theme of your level, again, I mean like if you have a cave, maybe you make an Indiana Jones boulder that just rolls down, right? That you don't even really have to add a constant force. You can just, put a rigid body out on it and have like a hill that it rolls down, things like that. And if you want, you could add a little bit of force to it. And so you can see the rubric here for more details. Just make sure you pay attention to the rubric and things like that. And I'll go ahead and get this lecture in here and open up the module. And then you guys can take the rest of class working on this, or I will allow if you have, I know midterms are kind of crazy right now, so if you guys have any midterms you need to get done or other stuff you need to work on, you can do that in class too. So I'm going to go ahead and get this lecture in here for those who need it and also may want to watch it again.